Daniel never forgot the day everything collapsed. It started like any other ordinary day. A quiet Tuesday morning, sunlight slipping through the curtains, the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air, and the rhythmic clatter of a keyboard as he checked his work emails. Ethan sat at the dining table, quietly doing his homework. There was no warning, no sign that a storm was silently brewing. But even if there had been, could Daniel have done anything differently? Some disasters are inevitable. He leaned back in his chair and opened his laptop to check the family's finances. Just a routine task, a part of his daily habit. But as soon as the banking window loaded, a notification made him freeze. Your account balance has dropped below the minimum threshold. Daniel frowned. This was strange. Ethan's college fund had always been safe, carefully preserved by mutual agreement between him and Vanessa. For 6 years, they had diligently contributed, setting aside a portion of their income each month to ensure their son's bright future. He took a deep breath, assuming it might just be a system error. But when he clicked into the account, his eyes widened. The account was empty. Not just a few hundred or a few $1,000s. Whole dollars! Daniel went numb. The shock turned his body to stone. There were no transactions, as if the money had never existed. A terrible premonition crept into his mind, making his heart pound. He quickly checked their other accounts, but they were all wiped clean. Immediately, he called Vanessa. The phone rang, the tone stretching on in vain. He tried again. Still, no answer. An invisible fear tightened around his chest. He got up and walked toward the bedroom. When he opened the closet, his blood ran cold. Half of Vanessa's clothes were gone. Not just her clothes, her suitcase, makeup, and personal belongings were all missing. Vanessa was gone. Ethan walked into the living room, holding half a bitten apple. "Where's Mom?" he asked, his voice void of concern. Daniel forced himself to swallow the lump in his throat. Did she say anything before she left? Ethan shrugged, taking another bite of his apple. She said she had to go somewhere. Daniel felt his heart tighten. That response wasn't just the truth. It was undeniable proof. Vanessa hadn't just left. She had no intention of coming back. And worse, she had stolen their son's future. But amid the storm of emotions, anger, pain, betrayal, Daniel failed to notice one thing. Ethan was completely unfazed. The days after Vanessa left were a chaotic blur for Daniel. The house felt eerily empty. Dinners without his wife's presence were more unsettling than their past arguments had ever been. He wasn't sure if he was angrier at Vanessa for betraying him or at himself for not seeing the signs earlier. But more than anything, he was heartbroken for Ethan. His son had lost his mother, lost the future they had painstakingly saved for. A shock that big, Ethan should have been devastated, crying, demanding answers from his father. But he wasn't. Ethan didn't seem confused or sad at all. He went to school on time, did his homework diligently, and kept busy with his model airplanes, as if nothing had happened. At first, Daniel convinced himself that maybe Ethanson simply didn't fully grasp the situation. But then, the strange behaviors began. Ethan started spending more time on the computer. Not to play games or watch cartoons like before. Every time Daniel walked into the room, Ethan would immediately shut off the screen and look at him with wary eyes. "What are you doing?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice calm. Ethan just shrugged. "Homework, Dad." But Daniel didn't believe him. His son's eyes didn't lie. That wasn't the look of a 12-year-old doing regular schoolwork. As days passed, more unusual things surfaced. Ethan began whispering on the phone late at night, his voice too low for Daniel to catch more than a few scattered words. One night, while getting a glass of water, Daniel caught Ethan standing in the dark corner of the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear. "Who are you talking to?" Ethan flinched, quickly shoving the phone into his pocket. "No one, Dad." Daniel frowned. His son had never hidden things from him before. But now, Ethan was keeping secrets. The strangest thing was that Ethan started spending hours locked inside the garage, alone. He had always loved tinkering with model kits, but this felt different. One night, unable to take it anymore, Daniel decided to see what his son was really up to. He opened the garage door and froze. On the whiteboard in front of Ethan was a complex financial diagram, along with lines of code scrolling across his computer screen. Numbers, words, graphs. It all looked like a meticulously planned operation. Scattered across the desk were unfamiliar electronic devices, tangled cables spread out everywhere. Daniel couldn't believe his eyes. His son wasn't just learning to code. He was orchestrating something far bigger. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Daniel asked, suspicion thick in his voice. Ethan turned around, a thin smile curling on his lips. But it wasn't the innocent smile of a child. "I'm taking back what belongs to us." Daniel didn't know whether to be astonished or terrified by what he had just witnessed. His 12-year-old son, not just intelligent, but operating on a level Daniel couldn't comprehend. Ethan wasn't merely a smart kid. He was orchestrating a game Daniel hadn't even realized he was a part of. After that night in the garage, when Daniel had discovered the intricate financial diagrams, he began secretly watching Ethan. He noticed the boy hardly slept, staying up late, fingers flying over the keyboard. Whenever Daniel approached, Ethan would instantly shut off his screen and meet his gaze with an unnerving calm. One night, Daniel decided to check Ethan's computer while he was asleep. He quietly entered his son's room and powered on the laptop. But before he could do anything, a message appeared on the screen. "Dad, I know what you're doing." Daniel jolted back, his breath catching in his throat. A second later, the screen went black. Ethan had anticipated this. The next morning, Ethan acted as if nothing had happened. When Daniel asked what he was up to, Ethan simply gave a faint smirk and said, "I'm just fixing what Mom did." And then, the impossible happened. 3 days later, Daniel received a call from the bank. "Mr. Daniel, we need to verify some unusual transactions on your account." Daniel frowned. "I haven't made any transactions." But when the bank employee listed what had occurred, Daniel could barely believe his ears. $50,000 had been restored to his account. Not just that, multiple transactions had taken place. Linked bank accounts belonging to Vanessa and Marcus had been frozen. The large sums of money Marcus had transferred to Vanessa, drained and rerouted into anonymous accounts. Daniel had made none of these transactions. His eyes immediately flickered toward Ethan. His son continued eating breakfast, perfectly composed, as if nothing had happened. "Ethan." Daniel's voice was low as he sat across from his son. "Do you know anything about this?" Ethan looked up, his expression chillingly calm. "Don't worry, Dad. Our money is back where it belongs." Daniel felt a cold shiver run down his spine. His son hadn't just recovered the lost money, he had financially crippled Marcus. But how? Not long after, Vanessa called. Her voice was shaky, filled with panic. "Daniel, what the hell is happening? What are you talking about?" Daniel responded icily. "My accounts, they're all frozen. I can't withdraw money. I can't pay for anything. Marcus lost everything too. He's furious. He thinks I betrayed him. Daniel, you have to help me." Daniel felt another shiver crawl up his spine. What had Ethan done? But instead of answering Vanessa, Daniel asked just one question. "Does our son have anything to do with this?" There was a pause. Then Vanessa's voice dropped to a whisper, filled with fear. "Daniel, Ethan is not a normal child." Daniel gripped the phone tighter. Ethan hadn't just retaliated, he had destroyed Marcus from the shadows. Marcus couldn't withdraw money, his accounts were being monitored, his fraudulent dealings had been flagged and reported to authorities with undeniable evidence. Ethan hadn't just taken back what was lost, he had made Marcus a wanted man. 3 days later, another call came. This time, the voice on the other end was full of rage and venom. "You think you can pull this off and get away with it?" Daniel gripped the phone tightly. No introduction was needed. It was Marcus. "I know what you did, Daniel. Either you or that little brat of yours. You really think you can take me down?" Daniel turned to look at Ethan. His son wasn't afraid. Marcus's voice seethed with fury. "You don't know who you're messing with, Daniel. This isn't over. I'll find you. I'll find your little boy. I will." Daniel hung up, but his heart was pounding against his ribs. Marcus wouldn't let this go. And Daniel knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. He turned to Ethan, his voice low and serious. "Do you know what just happened?" Ethan nodded, casually shrugging. "Don't worry, Dad. I planned for this." Daniel shuddered. His son hadn't just predicted Marcus's reaction. He had planned the next move. Ethan set down his spoon, meeting his father's gaze. A faint smirk curved his lips. Marcus made a big mistake. He thought I was just a kid. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, Marcus's threatening voice echoed in his mind. That man wasn't someone who let things go. A seasoned con artist, stripped of everything in the blink of an eye. He was bound to retaliate. But what worried Daniel more than Marcus was Ethan. His son showed no fear. After Marcus's call ended, Ethan had simply shrugged, finished his dinner, and gone to his room like nothing had happened. Daniel wanted to talk to him, to warn him that this wasn't a game anymore. They were up against a real threat. But when he looked into Ethan's cold, calculating eyes, he couldn't find the words. The boy had already prepared for this. The next day, everything seemed normal, but Daniel couldn't shake the unease creeping through him. He double-checked the front door, locked all the windows, and even set up security cameras. He knew that if Marcus said he was coming, he would come. And as expected, things got worse. That afternoon, a strange car appeared outside their house. It didn't move. No one stepped out, just sat there, motionless, like a predator waiting for the right moment. Daniel watched from the living room window, his muscles tensing. Ethan stood beside him, his gaze locked onto the car with eerie calm. "Is that him?" Daniel asked, his voice low. Ethan gave a small nod. "Maybe." Daniel couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his phone, ready to call the police. But before he could dial, Ethan placed a hand on his arm. "Dad, don't." Daniel turned to glare at his son. "Ethan, you don't understand. This guy is dangerous. We need the police." Ethan met his gaze without blinking. "The police won't do anything until he actually attacks. But I have another way." Daniel wanted to argue, but before he could, Ethan had already left the room. Moments later, he heard the garage door shut. 3 hours later, everything spiraled into chaos. Daniel was sitting in the living room when a loud crash shattered the night. Glass exploded across the floor. Daniel jumped up, his heart hammering in his chest. A brick had been thrown through the window. He rushed forward, eyes scanning the ground. A small piece of paper was tied to the brick. He picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was messy, but the message was crystal clear. "Shris, this isn't over. You and the kid will pay." Daniel clenched the note, cold sweat trickling down his back. Ethan appeared beside him, laptop in hand. But instead of fear, the boy simply smirked. I guess he just played his first move. Daniel spun toward his son, anger flashing in his eyes. "Ethan, this is not a game." Ethan's expression remained neutral, but I'm winning. After seeing the brick and the threat, Daniel wanted to get Ethan out of the house immediately. But Ethan had other plans. The boy spent the entire night in front of his screen, fingers moving at lightning speed. Daniel couldn't understand everything Ethan was doing, but he knew something big was happening. Finally, after hours of relentless work, Ethan leaned back in his chair, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. "It's done." Daniel frowned. "What did you do?" Ethan turned to him, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous edge. "You'll see." By dawn, Daniel's phone buzzed with a new message, a video file. With a growing sense of dread, he tapped the screen. The footage showed Marcus barking orders to someone. "Teach those two a lesson. I don't care how." Daniel's blood ran cold. "How?" He turned his head. Ethan was standing right there, watching him. "What?" The boy smirked. "I hacked his phone." Daniel stared at his son in shock. Ethan hadn't just fought back, he had trapped Marcus perfectly. Daniel didn't know whether to be proud or terrified. But then Ethan spoke again, and Daniel realized this wasn't over yet. "Dad, I still have one final move left." Daniel felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. In just a few days, his life had veered into a direction he never could have imagined. Vanessa's betrayal, Ethan's quiet yet calculated counterattack, and Marcus, now a cornered beast with nothing left to lose. Even after witnessing his son financially destroy Marcus, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. A man like Marcus wouldn't back down easily. And as expected, the battle was far from finished. The next morning, as Daniel poured himself a cup of coffee, Ethan walked into the kitchen, laptop in hand. He placed it on the table and turned the screen toward his father. "You need to see this." Daniel sat down, the weight in his chest growing heavier. When he looked at the screen, a video began to play. It showed Marcus standing in a dimly lit parking lot, screaming into his phone. "I don't care! I want them gone! That kid isn't normal. He can't be allowed to keep living." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Marcus wasn't just threatening them anymore. He was ordering their deaths. His grip tightened around the edge of the table, anger simmering beneath his skin. "How did you get this?" Ethan remained as calm as ever. "I trapped him. When I hacked his phone, I installed an automatic recording program. Every time he makes a call, we get the evidence." Daniel stared at his son. "Ethan, do you realize how dangerous this is?" Ethan nodded. "That's exactly why we have to end it now." Ethan began executing his final move. He compiled the audio recordings along with every piece of evidence tied to Marcus: fraudulent transactions, extortion, money laundering, and now an attempted murder plot. But he didn't send it to the police. Not yet. He sent it directly to Marcus. An hour later, a message appeared on Daniel's phone. "From what do you want?" Daniel narrowed his eyes at the screen, but before he could react, Ethan grabbed the phone from his hand. "I'll handle this." Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but Ethan was already typing. "We have everything on you. We'll send it to the police unless you disappear. No contact, no threats, no revenge. If you ever come near us again, the recordings go public." There was a long pause. Daniel could almost feel Marcus's rage and desperation through the silence. Then another message popped up. "You win." Daniel exhaled, relieved, but Ethan remained unmoved. "I don't trust him," he said. Daniel swallowed. "What do you think he'll do?" Ethan turned to him, his gaze ice cold. "A man like Marcus never gives up, but tonight he'll try to run, and when he does, the police will be waiting." Ethan was right. A few hours later, Marcus tried to escape, but he didn't realize Ethan had already set the trap. As soon as Marcus left the city, Ethan sent everything to the authorities. Police intercepted him on the highway. Marcus was arrested on the spot. No chance to flee. No way out. That evening, the news broke. On the screen, Daniel watched as Marcus, handcuffed, was shoved into a police car. The reporter announced he was facing multiple charges: financial fraud, death threats, and money laundering. Daniel exhaled, but a heavy question still lingered in his mind. He turned to Ethan. "You planned this from the start, didn't you?" Ethan nodded. "I knew Marcus wouldn't surrender. I just helped him get there faster." A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine, not because of Marcus, because of Ethan. His son hadn't just beaten Marcus, he had controlled everything from the beginning. Daniel didn't know whether to be proud or terrified. Ethan stood, walking over to the window, staring out into the calm night. "Dad, we're safe now." Daniel wasn't so sure, because one thought echoed in his mind, something Vanessa had once said. Ethan isn't a normal child, and now Daniel was starting to believe it. Marcus was caught. The police had more than enough evidence to charge him: financial fraud, money laundering, extortion, and even conspiracy to commit murder. That night, the news broadcast showed him handcuffed, head lowered, being escorted into a police car. Daniel should have felt relieved. The nightmare was finally over, but he couldn't shake the unease creeping into his mind. Not about Marcus, about Ethan. Ethan wasn't excited. He didn't seem relieved. When the news report aired, he simply sat there, watching the screen with empty eyes. Daniel swallowed hard and decided to break the silence. Marcus won't bother us anymore. Ethan gave a slight nod, his gaze never leaving the TV. "Do you think he'll give up, Mom?" His voice was eerily calm. Daniel froze. He had been trying not to think about Vanessa, but Ethan hadn't forgotten. "Maybe," Daniel admitted, "but the police will handle it." Ethan turned to him, his icy stare unblinking. "If they don't, I will." Daniel shuddered. Ethan had spent weeks planning Marcus's downfall. No mistakes, no loose ends, no hesitation. This wasn't normal. In the days after Marcus's arrest, life slowly returned to normal, but Daniel felt something had shifted. Ethan was different. He spoke less. He spent more time in his room. Before, Ethan had enjoyed building things, programming for fun, making model planes, experimenting with gadgets. Now he spent hours on his computer, and no one knew what he was doing. One night, Daniel woke up thirsty and went to get water. As he passed Ethan's room, he saw the faint glow of a laptop screen. Quietly, he stepped closer and pushed the door open just a crack. Ethan was sitting there, staring at his screen. Strings of encrypted code scrolled rapidly across it. His face was eerily focused, almost emotionless. Daniel hesitated, then softly called. Ethan flinched. He immediately shut the laptop and turned around. "What are you doing up?" His voice wasn't startled, it was cold. Daniel swallowed. "I just wanted to check on you." Ethan stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. A perfect smile. But it wasn't real. "I'm fine, Dad." Daniel didn't believe him. A week later, Vanessa called. At first, Daniel wasn't going to answer. But curiosity won. He picked up. Her voice was weak, almost trembling. Can you help me?" Daniel scoffed. "After everything you did?" Vanessa broke into sobs. "You don't understand. I have nothing left. The police are watching me. My accounts are frozen. Marcus is in jail. They think I'm involved too. I have no one. I only have you and Ethan." Daniel gripped the phone tighter. "You stole everything from your own son, and now you expect him to forgive you?" There was a long silence. Then Vanessa whispered something that made Daniel go cold. "Haven't you noticed anything strange about Ethan?" Daniel felt his entire body tense. "What do you mean?" Her voice trembled. "I don't know, but Ethan isn't a normal child anymore, Daniel. I know I was wrong. I hurt our family, but I'm still his mother, and I see what you don't." She hesitated before whispering, "He doesn't feel anything. No fear, no anger, no hatred. He just calculates. Ethan didn't just take down Marcus. He controlled everything from the start." Daniel's heart pounded violently. Vanessa continued, her voice filled with fear. "Daniel, one day you'll realize our son isn't like other kids. You have to stop him before it's too late." Daniel hung up immediately. But her words wouldn't leave his head. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat in the living room, staring out the window. The streetlights bathed the neighborhood in a soft yellow glow. Everything outside was calm. But inside him, a storm was raging. Ethan had protected their family. Ethan had defeated Marcus. But how? Ethan hadn't just fought back. He had controlled everything from the beginning. Daniel should have been proud of his son, but all he felt was fear. Ethan was still awake, sitting in his room, laptop open, working tirelessly. No hesitation, no exhaustion. Daniel watched him from afar and realized something terrifying. It wasn't Marcus. It wasn't Vanessa. The greatest danger might not be outside. It might already be inside his home. In the days following Vanessa's call, Daniel could no longer look at Ethan the same way. Every action, every glance, every word from his son felt calculated, not because Ethan had done anything wrong, but because he showed no emotion. Daniel tried to convince himself that it was over. Marcus was gone. Vanessa had paid for her mistakes. The police had assured him there were no more threats. Their family was supposed to be at peace. But Ethan wasn't. He wasn't happy. He wasn't sad. He wasn't relieved. Just calm. Disturbingly calm. One evening, as Daniel sat in the living room, Ethan approached him, laptop in hand. "Dad, can you help me with something?" Ethan's voice was steady, as if it were just another casual request. Daniel looked up, forcing himself to stay calm. "What is it, son?" Ethan placed the laptop on the table and pulled up a screen full of complex lines of code. Daniel didn't understand them, but he knew this wasn't some school project. "I need access to certain systems," Ethan explained. "But they're locked behind multiple security layers. If I had an extra set of hands, I could finish faster." Daniel went cold. He didn't know what frightened him more, that Ethan was capable of doing these things, or that he didn't see anything wrong with it. "Ethan?" Daniel spoke carefully, keeping his voice level. "What exactly are you doing?" Ethan stared at him for a few seconds. "Just a small project." Daniel inhaled deeply. "A project about what?" Ethan's expression didn't waver. "Control." Daniel's heart pounded. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Daniel made a decision he never thought he would. He entered his son's room and opened his laptop. He had never violated Ethan's privacy before, but this time, he had to know. The screen revealed a labyrinth of running programs. Algorithms, encrypted scripts. Daniel couldn't make sense of it all, but one thing was clear. Ethan wasn't just accessing random systems. He was infiltrating financial networks. And not just that. There was a folder labeled simply, Next Project. Daniel clicked it. Inside was a list of high-profile individuals, politicians, CEOs, wealthy figures tied to financial scandals, people who had exploited others for power. Vanessa was on the list. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Ethan hadn't just wanted to take down Marcus. He wanted more. Daniel shut the laptop and stumbled out of the room, his legs unsteady. He collapsed onto the couch, his hands gripping his head. What had he raised? Ethan wasn't just smart. He was becoming a force. And Daniel couldn't stop hearing Vanessa's voice. Ethan isn't like other kids. One day, you'll see. Daniel had seen. Ethan no longer recognized moral boundaries. He didn't see manipulating systems, controlling people, eliminating threats as wrong. No Marcus? Fine. Ethan would find another target. No Vanessa. Ethan would purge others like her himself. Daniel wasn't afraid of the outside world anymore. He was afraid of his own son. He had to stop him before it was too late. But how? When Ethan was already 10 steps ahead. Daniel had realized the truth, but the question remained. Could he stop Ethan? Or had his son already stepped onto a path from which there was no return? Maybe. Ethan wasn't a bad kid. Maybe he just saw the world differently. A world where there was no right or wrong, only the strong controlling the weak. A world where justice wasn't something you waited for. It was something you took with your own hands. But if one child could do this, then the real question was, how many Ethans are out there? How many kids are watching, calculating, and ready to act in the way they believe is right? Society is changing. Technology has given power to those who know how to wield it. This story might be fiction, but are you sure it couldn't happen in real life? What do you think? If you were Daniel, what would you do? Would you be proud or afraid? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, mind-bending stories. Hit that like button, share with your friends, and turn on notifications to stay updated on the most captivating content.